Hey everyone, it's the Koopa Man. Last week we talked about the trope of self-inserts and author avatars, and towards the outro, I mentioned that the phenomenon exists past just literary and cinematic media into video games and tabletop. This time, we're going to talk about just that, the trope of characters who are purely to live as a vessel for the player, the heroic mime character trope. In a previous video on flat characters, I touched upon this character archetype using the Pokemon trainers and Fallout Wanderers as examples. In that video, I boiled the trope down to its main point, that Red and the Lone Wanderer are not so much characters, but avatars for the players to inhabit. That they become, in essence, vehicles to allow the player to make the choices and decide how the story of the game plays out. And while even in some like Fallout, there is structure to the choices you're allowed to make, as a fully free open world with all options on the table would be impossible to make as a game, the choices the player makes are more important than what is or is not canon to the game's story. This is why in all Pokemon or Fallout auxiliary media, there isn't a definitive version of either Red or the Lone Wanderer, because making a definitive and canon story and character for those two would defeat what the series was trying to create. It wasn't about the canon, it was about the experience. That's what defines the reasoning behind making a video game character into a heroic mime. It's not that the character doesn't talk, even if there are a few meta jokes thrown at the expense of this trope, or that they don't have a personality. Many of the characters who make up this archetype can be very expressive, but it's that the character exists to be an extension of the player. Another extremely noteworthy example is Link from The Legend of Zelda. Even his name is a hint of this mentality. He is the link between the player and the world of Hyrule. And when you consider what games like Zelda are inspired by, fantasy tabletop adventure games like Dungeons & Dragons, as well as Shigeru Miyamoto's own childhood adventures, it makes sense why Link doesn't really have all that much to say. Anything he would have to say wouldn't be all that important regardless. It's about the adventure, not about Link as a character, which is the exact mentality behind tabletop adventure games like D&D. Hence why any character can go on any adventure within the setting. In fact, if the technology when the game was made weren't so archaic, we may have seen different classes of Link as options similar to how Dungeons & Dragons does it. Which might be how we got Linkle and her crossbow guns in Hyrule Warriors, come to think of it. All she is a female Link with a cute personality, reclassed from a paladin into a rogue. This is also why people get so up in arms when Samus Aran has anything to say in the Metroid games. People confuse her for a heroic mime character when in actuality, she never really has been. Sure, she's a player character, but she's always had her own thoughts and personality separate from the player. It's just you don't see these outside of small bits of exposition text in the games, because Samus rarely has people to bounce topics off of, so the 2 times she did, Other M in Metroid Prime 4, it caused the audience to shit their diapers. Granted, this isn't excusing Other M, it has a number of flaws as a game, but when it extends to Prime 4, a game that is at least an 8.5 out of 10, you know people just want to create problems when none exist. And that's really the grand summation of the controversy surrounding that game. Just a bunch of idiots who have too few real problems, so they go out and make imaginary problems. Just like feminists, if we're being honest. But all of that is to say that quiet characters or stoic characters aren't necessarily heroic mimes, and heroic mimes aren't necessarily quiet or stoic. Chrono from Chrono Trigger is a textbook example of a heroic mime in a JRPG, even to the point that it's the butt of a couple of jokes, but he's anything but quiet or stoic, more so along the lines of a hot-blooded shonen protagonist, and a bit of a Dorcas Malorcas if we're being frank. Then there's Golden Sun, which does something a bit interesting. In the first game, you primarily play as Isaac and his party, but there is a secondary team in the events led by a character named Felix, who is shown perfectly capable of speaking when Isaac is not. But in Golden Sun 2, you pick up where Golden Sun 1 left off, playing as Felix instead, who no longer speaks seemingly, but when you encounter Isaac again, he does. The implication is very simple. Both characters could talk, and probably did talk to one another, but we, as the players, were just unable to see what the character we were currently controlling was saying, for some reason. This actually, by my own exclusion of Samus Aran, brings up an interesting conundrum into the mix. Are Isaac and Felix heroic mimes? Or were we just not paying attention to what they were saying on the player's end of things? It honestly depends on how you look at it. One may argue that Red does have a character the same as Felix or Isaac, and that we just don't see his dialogue either. but I would argue Golden Sun as an RPG is far more structured than Pokemon is, with less freedom of choice, which ultimately makes the fact that they're mute kind of irrelevant, more of a holdover from a different era of RPG games really. After all, Final Fantasy may have started with a heroic mime party. As soon as Final Fantasy II, and codified in Final Fantasy IV, we had parties that were led by very developed, very well-rounded characters. Heck, Cecil Harvey and Cloud Strife, you can argue, are character studies in and of themselves. But compare that to Fallout, Elder Scrolls, or Pokemon, which have more of a focus on player choices mattering and more open-ended experiences. Even Dragon Quest, primitive as it is, has enough of an open-ended nature to fulfill this end. It all comes down to whether the game is focused more on telling a structured story or giving the player an experience, I would say. After all, the purpose of the heroic mime is to immerse the player into the world of the game they're playing, which is a different kind of immersion to being immersed into the story being presented and told to the player in a game like Final Fantasy VII. All of this is to say that the heroic mime must be a self-insert for the player behind them. Otherwise, they're just a character in a video game. Again, some would argue that includes Samus Aran, but again, Metroid tourists don't know how to read the scan logs. They serve a purpose, getting you to believe you're in the world. You wouldn't want your tabletop DM to give you a character he made himself and go on a story that he had pre-written. Video games are an interactive medium, and you want to interact with the world you put in. That isn't to say that story-driven games aren't a thing, I already cited a few, but it's the nature of the beast. And there are so few mediums besides video games, tabletop gaming, and maybe choose-your-own-adventure books that have characters like the heroic mime, or even let you interact with the world in such a way. It goes to show how unique the trope is, hell, how unique the mediums are in that regard. Where else but in video games can you start the entire experience basically like this?
Finally awake. You were trying to cross the border, right? Walked right into that Imperial ambush, same as us. And that thief over there.
Yeah, Koopa's transparently trying to force a meme again. But think about it. Credits pop up, black screen, you open your eyes, and there you are in the world of Skyrim. Story's all set up, and you're ready to roll. Nowhere but in video games are there experiences like this. The same can be said for the tabletop gaming scene. Most games encourage you to make your own character and insert yourself in their shoes. You know, role-playing. They're role-playing games, and the priority in a role-play is to be immersed in the world rather than in the story. And no, this doesn't mean that The Witcher 3 isn't a role-playing game just because Geralt of Rivia is the role you inhabit. It means that he's not a heroic mime self-insert, and he doesn't need to be. If you're playing The Witcher, you want to play the role of Geralt. But many Western RPGs are more focused on the immersion elements and include create a character protagonist towards that end, though it's not a purely Western phenomenon. Pokemon recently adopted that style in the last few games, so did Fire Emblem to a smaller degree. But if we go into the whole create a character thing, it's a whole different rabbit hole. It should be noted that not every create a character is a heroic mime, but many are. It all comes back to there being nothing wrong with self-inserts in stories, or in this case, in video games. Role-playing is fun, and a lot of people enjoy entering the worlds of Final Fantasy, Cyberpunk 2077, Pokemon, Zelda, and other such games and settings. It just leads back to the fact that self-inserts aren't bad depending on how they're used. And in the case of the heroic mime, their purpose is pretty clear: to immerse the player into the world of the game. And for that purpose, they serve it pretty well. But that's all I got for now. This has been the Koopa Man. If you like this video, leave a like and subscribe as it helps my channel grow. Be sure to comment about your favorite heroic mimes in games, and check out my channel for more. And until next time, game on.